The evening was already growing quiet when he stepped inside. The place was warm compared to the cold air outside, and for a moment he simply stood near the door, letting his body adjust. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind that had seen many long days. His shoes made a soft sound against the floor as he moved forward, careful not to draw attention. He did not come with any plan except one simple hope to ease the hunger that had been sitting in his stomach since morning. The room was busy in its own calm way. People were scattered around, talking in low voices, some laughing softly, others staring at their phones or cups in front of them. No one noticed him at first, and that was something he was used to. He had learned long ago how to exist quietly, how to take up as little space as possible. Still, he paused for a second, steadying his breath. Asking for help was never easy, no matter how many times he had done it before. He walked slowly toward the counter, his eyes lowered, not out of shame, but out of habit. He waited until the person there looked up. When that moment came, he spoke gently, his voice calm and respectful. He did not ask for money. He did not tell a long story. He simply asked if there was any food he could have, even something small. His words were simple, chosen carefully, as if he did not want to trouble anyone more than necessary. The question hung in the air for a moment. The person behind the counter looked at him, then looked past him, as if deciding what to do. This kind of pause was familiar. Sometimes it ended with a kind gesture. Other times, it ended with silence or a short refusal. He stood still, hands relaxed at his sides, ready for either answer. Around them, life continued. A chair scraped lightly against the floor. Someone laughed at a quiet joke. A cup was set down with a soft tap. To everyone else, this was just another ordinary evening. But for him, this small moment carried weight. Hunger has a way of making time feel slower, making every second stretch longer than it should. He was not asking out of laziness or expectation. His life had been full of work, some of it hard, some of it unnoticed. There had been better days, days when meals were not a question and sleep came easily. Those days felt far away now, but not forgotten. He carried them inside him like old photographs, faded, but still real. As he waited, his eyes wandered around the room, not to distract himself, but because he liked to observe people. He always had. He noticed the small things others missed, the way someone's shoulders relaxed when they felt safe, the way another person tapped their fingers when they were nervous. These details reminded him that everyone was carrying something, even if it could not be seen. In the corner of the room sat an old piano. It did not shine. Its surface was dull from years of use, and a few keys looked slightly different from the others. It was not placed to attract attention, almost as if it had been forgotten there. He noticed it without staring, the way one notices an old friend across a crowded space. His gaze lingered for just a second longer than necessary before returning to the counter. The person behind the counter finally spoke, not harshly, but not warmly either. There was hesitation in the response, a tone that suggested uncertainty. He listened carefully, nodding once to show he understood. Whatever the answer would be, he was prepared to accept it quietly. Causing a scene was never his way. He had learned patience early in life. Waiting had become a skill, almost a habit. Waiting for work, waiting for chances, waiting for things to change. Some people thought patience meant weakness, but he knew better. Patience was what allowed him to keep moving forward. Even when progress was slow, a few people nearby had begun to notice the exchange, though they pretended not to. Curious glances came and went. No one said anything. Most of them assumed this moment would end quickly, just like many others they had seen before. A request, a response, and then life would go on as usual. He shifted his weight slightly, not from discomfort, but to stay balanced. His stomach tightened, reminding him why he was there. Still, his face remained calm. Years of experience had taught him that showing desperation rarely helped. Respect and quiet dignity were all he had to offer, and he offered them freely. For a brief moment, he wondered if he should say more, explain himself better. But he stopped that thought. He had learned that explanations often changed nothing. Actions mattered more, even if the chance to act had not yet arrived. The room felt smaller now, though nothing had physically changed. Perhaps it was the feeling of being seen, even just a little, that made it that way. He was aware of the piano again, sitting silently in the corner, unaware of how close it was to the center of his thoughts. He did not know why his eyes returned to it. Maybe it was the shape, or the way it stood quietly while everything else moved around it. Or maybe it was something deeper, something tied to memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Memories of sound, of rhythm, of moments when his hands had felt sure and steady. The hunger was real. But so was something else, a quiet alertness, a feeling that this moment mattered more than it appeared. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the present. Right now, all that mattered was the answer he would receive. The person behind the counter seemed to be thinking, weighing options. There was no cruelty in their face, only caution. He respected that. Everyone had their own rules to follow, their own limits. He had never believed the world owed him anything. As the seconds passed, the noise of the room faded slightly in his awareness. He became more aware of his own breathing, slow and even. Whatever happened next, he told himself, he would handle it the same way he always did, with calm acceptance. He did not know that this quiet moment, this simple request for food, was about to become something far bigger than hunger. To him, it was just another evening, another small step in a long journey. The room did not feel special. The piano did not look important, and he certainly did not feel like someone about to be remembered yet. Sometimes the most important moments begin this way, softly. Without warning, hidden inside ordinary seconds that almost pass unnoticed. He stood there, waiting, unaware that the silence around him was slowly turning into the start of a story. No one in that room would ever forget. The response did not come as a clear yes or no. Instead, it arrived slowly, wrapped in hesitation. The person behind the counter leaned slightly forward, lowering their voice. They explained that food could not just be given away like that. There were rules, expectations, and reasons that did not need to be fully explained. The words were not unkind, but they carried distance. He listened without interrupting, his face steady. He nodded once, showing he understood. He had heard similar explanations many times before, in different places, spoken in different tones. Sometimes the words were sharp, sometimes they were soft. Either way, the meaning was usually the same. Then something unexpected followed. The person paused, glanced around the room, and spoke again. This time, there was a small shift in tone, as if an idea had just formed. They mentioned that food could be given if he could offer something in return. Not money. Not work in the usual sense. Just something that added value to the place even for a short moment. The words landed strangely. He was not offended, but he was surprised. He had been asked many things before, cleaning tables, carrying boxes, sweeping floors. This felt different, vague, unclear. He asked softly what they meant. The reply came with a small gesture toward the room. Something simple, the person said. Something people would appreciate. It was not a demand, more like a suggestion, but it carried weight. A quiet challenge. He stood there, thinking. His first instinct was to decline politely and leave. Hunger was painful, but embarrassment could be worse. Drawing attention to himself was never his goal. He liked to pass through places unnoticed, leaving no trace behind. A few people nearby were now openly watching. Not with cruelty, but with curiosity. They leaned back in their chairs, sensing that something unusual was happening. Others still remained unaware, lost in their own conversations. He took a slow breath. His eyes drifted again, almost without permission, toward the corner of the room. The piano sat exactly where it had been before, quiet and patient. It looked old, perhaps rarely used. A few scratches marked its surface. Signs of a long life filled with stories no one remembered anymore. The sight of it stirred something inside him. Not excitement, not fear. Something softer, familiar, like hearing a song from childhood playing faintly in the distance. He did not speak right away. Silence stretched between him and the counter. The person waited, arms resting lightly on the surface, watching him closely now. This was no longer just about food. It was about choice. He knew he could walk away. No one was stopping him. The door was still behind him, the cold air waiting on the other side. He had walked away from worse situations before. Pride had never fed him, but it had kept him whole. Still, his feet did not move. Memories surfaced slowly, uninvited. A younger version of himself, sitting somewhere quiet, hands resting on keys that felt too big at first. Long hours of practice, calloused fingers, moments of doubt, moments of joy. Music had once been a language he spoke fluently, even when words failed him. Life had taken many turns since then. Responsibilities, losses, mischances. Music had faded into the background, becoming something he carried inside rather than something he shared. The world had not made space for it. He had learned to survive without it. Yet here it was, waiting in the corner of an ordinary room. He looked back at the person behind the counter. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. He said he might be able to do something if they were willing to let him try. He did not promise anything. He did not explain further. The person studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. There was uncertainty, but also interest. They gestured toward the piano, as if to say the decision was his. A low murmur spread through the nearby tables. Some people leaned forward. Others exchanged quick glances. A few smiled, already assuming this would be awkward or amusing. No one expected anything impressive. He felt the weight of those unspoken expectations, but he did not let them settle on him. He focused instead on his breathing, steady and controlled. He reminded himself that this was not about proving anything. It was simply about responding to a moment. He took a step toward the piano, then another. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of memory. The sound of his shoes against the floor echoed more loudly now. Maybe he was just more aware of it. The closer he got, the quieter the room seemed to become. Conversations softened. Movements slowed. People sensed that something was about to happen, even if they did not know what. He reached the piano and stopped. Up close, it looked older than he had thought. The keys were slightly yellowed. A few had small chips along the edges. This was not an instrument meant for show. It was meant to be used. He hesitated, hands hovering just above the keys. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. It had been a long time. Too long, perhaps. What if his fingers no longer remembered what to do? What if the sound came out wrong? The hunger twisted again in his stomach, grounding him. This was not about perfection. It was about honesty. He lowered himself onto the bench. It creaked softly under his weight. He adjusted his position, the way his body seemed to remember, before his mind did. His hands rested lightly on his knees. The room held its breath. He placed his fingers on the keys. The touch sent a quiet shock through him. The surface was cool and smooth, familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. He closed his eyes for a second, not to shut the world out, but to let everything settle. This was not a performance yet. This was a conversation between him and the instrument. A test, a reminder. Somewhere behind him, a chair shifted. Someone coughed. But most of the room remained still, waiting. He had no idea how this would end. He only knew that turning away now would feel worse than trying. So he stayed. He breathed in slowly. And in that quiet moment, before a single note was played, the ordinary evening began to change, even if no one realized it yet. He sat still for a moment longer, fingers resting lightly on the keys, as if listening for something only he could hear. The room felt different now. The usual sounds had faded into the background, replaced by a quiet attention that was almost heavy. People were watching, though most of them did not even realize when they had stopped talking. He pressed one key gently. The sound was soft, slightly uneven, but clear. It echoed through the room in a way that surprised a few people. Some lifted their heads, others paused mid-sip. It was just a single note, yet it carried weight. He tried another, then another, slow and careful. He was not playing a song yet. He was testing the piano, learning its mood, its limits. Old instruments had their own personalities. You could not rush them. You had to listen first. A few people exchanged looks, unsure what to expect. This did not sound like a mistake, but it did not sound impressive either. Some assumed this would end quickly, just a few awkward notes before he stood up and left. He shifted slightly on the bench, straightening his back. His fingers began to move with more confidence, pressing keys in a pattern that felt natural. The sounds connected, forming something gentle and steady. It was not loud. It did not demand attention. Yet slowly, it began to hold it. The room grew quieter. Someone near the window lowered their phone without realizing it. Another person leaned forward, elbows on the table. Even the person behind the counter stopped moving, hands resting still as they watched. The music continued, growing richer, deeper. His hands moved more freely now, no longer stiff with doubt. Years of memory flowed through his fingers, guiding them where his thoughts could not. He was no longer thinking about hunger or eyes on his back. He was simply playing. Each note carried emotion, not sharp or dramatic, but honest. The kind of sound that felt lived in, shaped by experience rather than practice alone. It spoke of quiet nights and long days, of loss and endurance, of moments when music was the only place he felt understood. The piano responded in its own imperfect way. Some notes rang brighter than others. A few sounded rough around the edges. Instead of fighting this, he worked with it. Letting the flaws become part of the story, people began to notice something unusual happening inside themselves. The room felt warmer. Time felt slower. Conversations that had once seemed important now felt distant and unnecessary. No one laughed. No one whispered jokes. Even those who had expected failure now watched with focused attention. The music was not showing off. It was inviting them in. He shifted into a different pattern, smoother, more flowing. The sound filled the space without overwhelming it. The piano no longer seemed forgotten. It had become the center of the room, a quiet heart beating beneath everything else. A woman near the back wiped her eyes quickly, surprised by her own reaction. A man folded his arms, staring at the floor, lost in thought. No one spoke. No one wanted to break the moment. The hunger that had brought him there felt far away now. His body was still tired, still empty, but his mind was full. The music carried him somewhere safer, somewhere familiar. He played as if telling a story, one part leading naturally into the next. There was sadness in it, but also hope. There were pauses where the silence mattered just as much as the sound. In those pauses, the room breathed together. Even the smallest movements felt louder, not the shift of a chair, the quiet clink of a cup. Yet none of it disrupted the flow. Everything seemed to move around the music, not against it. The person behind the counter felt a knot form in their chest. This was not what they had expected. This was not entertainment. This was something deeper, something real. He reached a point where the melody softened, almost fading. His hand slowed, hovering for a second before continuing. That hesitation made the next notes feel even more powerful when they came. The piano sang. People who had walked in halfway through the performance stopped near the door, unsure whether to enter or leave. They sensed that they had stepped into something important, so they stayed quietly. He was no longer aware of how long he had been playing. Time had slipped away unnoticed. There was only the sound, the movement, the connection between him and the instrument. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing matched the rhythm of the music. This was where he felt whole. The melody built slowly, reaching higher notes that rang clearly through the room. It was not loud, but it was strong. The kind of sound that made people sit straighter, that made hearts beat a little faster. A few people smiled without knowing why. Others closed their eyes. Letting the music carry them somewhere private, he began to bring the piece toward an ending, not sudden, but gentle. The notes softened again, slowing as if reluctant to let go. Each sound lingered just long enough to be felt. The final notes came quietly, almost like a whisper. His fingers lifted slowly from the keys, and the last sound faded into silence. No one moved. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of feeling, full of shared understanding. For a few seconds, the room existed in that stillness. Unwilling to return to normal, he remained seated, hands resting in his lap, head slightly lowered. He did not look around. He did not wait for approval. He simply breathed somewhere in the room. Stowen finally exhaled. What had begun as a simple request for food had turned into something none of them expected. And though the evening was far from over, everyone there knew one thing for sure. This moment would not be forgotten. The silence stayed longer than anyone expected. It was not awkward or uncomfortable. It felt respectful, like the room itself was giving the music time to settle. No one rushed to clap. No one spoke. They simply sat there, letting the feeling sink in. He was the first to move. Slowly, he lifted his head and looked down at his hands, as if checking that they were still his. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the release of everything he had held inside while playing. He took a deep breath and let it out quietly. Then someone near the front began to clap. Just one person? The sound was soft at first, unsure. A second later, another joined in. Then another. Within moments, the room filled with applause. It was not loud or wild. It was steady and sincere, the kind that came from something real. He did not stand. He did not bow. He stayed seated, unsure how to respond. His face showed surprise more than pride. He had not played for praise. He had played because the moment had asked for it. People looked at one another with raised eyebrows and small smiles, as if silently asking, "Did you feel that too?" Some nodded. Some wiped their eyes again, no longer hiding it. The music had touched places they did not expect. The person behind the counter stepped away from their spot and walked closer. Their expression had changed completely. The hesitation from earlier was gone, replaced by something closer to respect. They spoke softly to him, thanking him for the music. Their voice carried emotion they did not try to hide. He listened, nodding slightly. When they mentioned the food again, he seemed almost surprised, as if he had forgotten why he was there. Hunger returned to his awareness, but now it felt different, quieter. The person assured him there was no question anymore. He was welcome to eat. They said it not like a rule being followed, but like a gift being offered freely. A few people nearby spoke up, asking questions. Where did he learn to play? How long had it been since he last touched a piano? He answered simply, without long explanations. His voice was calm, almost shy. He did not tell his whole story. He did not feel the need to. Someone else offered him a seat at their table. Another suggested he play again sometime. These offers came gently, without pressure. As if people did not want to scare the moment away. He stood slowly from the bench, feeling the stiffness in his legs. The piano bench creaked again, breaking the tension just enough to remind everyone they were still in an ordinary place. As he stepped away from the piano, he ran his hand lightly along its edge. It felt like saying goodbye to something that had just spoken for him. The room slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed, though at a softer volume. People leaned closer to one another now, sharing quiet thoughts about what they had just witnessed. The usual noise came back, but the feeling remained. He was brought a simple meal. Nothing fancy. Warm, filling, and enough. He thanked the person who handed it to him, his words sincere. He took the plate and sat down at a small table near the side. As he ate, he felt eyes on him, but not in a way that made him uncomfortable. It felt more like curiosity mixed with care. He kept his focus on the food, eating slowly, appreciating each bite. A few people stopped by briefly, offering kind words. They did not ask for photos. They did not treat him like a performer. They spoke to him like a person. One older man paused beside him and said, quietly, that the music reminded him of someone he loved long ago. He did not explain further. He did not need to. He simply nodded and moved on. Those words stayed with him. He realized then that the piano had given him more than food. It had given him a moment of connection, something he had been missing without fully realizing it. The person behind the counter checked on him again, asking if he needed anything else. He shook his head gently. The meal was enough. More than enough. As he finished eating, he looked around the room once more. It looked the same as before. Same tables. Same lights. Same walls. Yet it felt changed. like a place that had briefly held something special. He wiped his hands, stood up, and prepared to leave. There was no announcement, no grand exit. Just a quiet decision to move on. Before reaching the door, he turned back toward the piano one last time. Someone had already lifted the cover slightly, as if checking that it was still real. He smiled faintly. When he stepped outside, the cool air met him again. The sounds of the street replaced the soft noise of the room. Life moved on, as it always did, but inside, something had shifted. He walked away with a full stomach and a lighter heart, unaware that the people he left behind would carry that moment with them far longer than he realized. For them, it had been an unexpected gift in the middle of an ordinary evening for him. It was a reminder that even quiet lives can create echoes that last. The night moved on, but the feeling stayed with him as he walked down the street. The city sounds surrounded him against cars passing, distant voices, the hum of life continuing without pause. Yet inside him, something was quieter than usual. Not empty, but settled. He walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because he did not feel the need to rush. The warmth from the meal lingered, but more than that, there was a sense of balance he had not felt in a long time. For once, hunger was not the loudest thing in his body or his mind as he passed shop windows and darkened buildings. Moments from the evening replayed softly in his thoughts. The first note, the silence, the faces in the room. None of it felt unreal. It felt simple, honest, and strangely necessary. He did not think of it as a performance. He did not imagine it would be remembered. To him, it was just a moment when he had answered a quiet call. Still, he could not ignore the way it had changed the air around him, the way people had listened. He stopped briefly under a streetlight and looked up at the sky. Clouds moved slowly overhead, hiding most of the stars. He smiled faintly. Life had not suddenly become easier. Tomorrow would bring the same challenges, the same uncertainty. But something inside him had shifted, and that mattered. He remembered a time when music had been part of his daily life. Not as a dream of fame or success, but as a way to make sense of the world. Over time, responsibilities and setbacks had pushed it aside. Survival had taken priority. Music had become a memory instead of a practice. Tonight had reminded him that it was still there. Waiting, he continued walking until the building was far behind him. Inside that place, people were still talking about what had happened. Some would tell others about it later, describing it differently each time. Some would keep it to themselves, holding on to the feeling rather than the details. A few might forget parts of it by morning, but not all of it. The sound would stay, even if only as an emotion they could not fully explain. He did not know any of this. He only knew what he felt. He found a quiet spot to sit and rest for a while. The bench was cold, but he did not mind. He closed his eyes and let the night settle around him. His hands rested on his knees, fingers relaxed. For the first time in a long while, they felt useful again, not just for work, but for expression. He thought about the piano, sitting alone again in the corner of that room. He hoped someone else would play it soon. Instruments, like people, were not meant to be ignored. A small sense of purpose began to grow inside him. It was not a plan, not yet. Just an idea. Maybe he would look for places where music was welcome. Maybe he would play again if the moment felt right. Maybe he would let that part of himself breathe more often. There was no promise in it, no guarantee. Just possibility. The world had not changed overnight. He was still the same person, walking the same streets. But now he carried proof that he still had something to offer beyond survival. Somewhere. The memory of that music would live on in quiet ways. In the way someone listened a little closer the next time they heard a piano. In the way another person looked differently at a stranger asking for help. In the way kindness felt more natural after being reminded of shared humanity. He stood up and stretched, feeling the stiffness leave his legs. He took one last look down the street and started walking again. Steps steady and sure. The night air felt less heavy now. What had started as a simple request for food had turned into a reminder for everyone involved. A reminder that talent does not always arrive dressed for attention. That dignity can exist even in need. that small moments, when met with openness, can leave deep marks. He disappeared into the quiet of the city, unnoticed once more. But the echo of that piano followed him, not as sound, but as meaning, and somewhere behind him. In a room that looked ordinary to anyone passing by, a story had quietly been completed. One that would be carried forward not by fame or headlines, but by memory, feeling, and the simple truth that even the humblest moments can become legendary. The days that followed were quiet, but they did not feel empty. He moved through them with a slightly different rhythm, as if something unseen was keeping time beside him. Mornings came with the same worries and the same simple routines, yet his steps felt more grounded. He noticed small things more often, now the way light touched the pavement, the way sounds overlapped and faded. Music seemed to live everywhere if he listened closely enough. He did not rush to tell anyone about what had happened. There was no one waiting for the story, and he did not feel the need to turn it into one. Moments like that lost something when explained too much. They were meant to be felt, not repeated. Still, the memory stayed close. When he passed places with open doors and soft noise spilling out, he found himself listening. He wondered if there was a piano inside, or a guitar leaning against a wall, or a voice warming up quietly before being heard. The thought no longer felt distant or painful. It felt possible. One afternoon, while resting in a public space, he noticed a small sign nearby about open music hours. Nothing fancy. Just a simple note inviting people to play if they wished. He read it twice, then looked away, unsure. He had learned not to expect too much from invitations meant for everyone. He sat there for a while, watching others come and go. Some looked confident. Others looked unsure, just like he felt. The idea of playing again stirred both hope and doubt. He reminded himself that the night of the piano had not been about proving anything. It had been about answering a moment. When the time felt right, he stood up. Inside, the space was smaller than the one from that evening. The piano was newer, brighter, and clearly cared for. It felt different under his fingers, almost too perfect. He hesitated, then smiled at the thought. Not every place needed the same approach. He played softly at first. No crowd gathered. No silence fell. A few people passed by, some slowing, some not, and that was okay. The music did not need to stop the world to matter. He played for himself. When he finished, a few quiet claps followed. A nod. A simple thank you. Nothing more. He felt satisfied in a way that surprised him. This was enough. Word of the earlier moment traveled slowly, not through headlines or screens, but through people. Someone mentioned it to a friend. That friend told another. The details changed, but the feeling stayed. It became one of those stories people shared when talking about unexpected kindness or hidden talent. Back at the place where it had first happened. The piano was used more often. People who had never touched it before found the courage to try. The room carried a different energy now, like permission had been granted. The person behind the counter remembered him often. Not with guilt or pride, but with appreciation. They kept a small note near the register, reminding themselves to pause before saying no. To listen before deciding. Others carried their own quiet changes. One person began paying more attention to strangers. Another started practicing an instrument they had given up years ago. Small shifts barely noticeable on their own, but real. As for him, life did not suddenly offer clear paths. Work came and went. Some nights were harder than others, but the weight of feeling invisible had lessened. He knew now that his presence could shape a space. Even briefly, he began carrying a small notebook, jotting down melodies when they came to him. Sometimes they arrived in the middle of the night. Sometimes while walking, he did not judge them. He simply let them exist. He learned to accept help without shame and to offer what he could without expecting reward. Music became part of that exchange, not currency, but connection. One evening, passing by the same street as before, he slowed his pace. He did not go inside. He did not need to. The memory lived comfortably now, no longer sharp or urgent. It had done its work. He kept walking, humming softly to himself. Life remained uncertain, but it felt wider. There was room again for expression, for moments that did not serve survival alone. He understood now that dignity did not come from having everything figured out. It came from showing up honestly, even when the outcome was unknown. The story of that night would continue to be told, shaped by different voices and memories. Some would exaggerate it. Others would keep it simple. But at its heart, it would always be the same. A quiet person. A simple request. A shared moment that reminded people of what it means to listen. He blended back into the flow of the city, just another figure among many. Yet something about the way he walked suggested ease, as if he had made peace with who he was and what he carried. Not every legend is loud. Some are built from stillness, from kindness, from courage that shows up without announcement, and sometimes, all it takes to begin one is a small question asked softly and a room willing, just for a moment. To hear the answer, time passed in quiet layers, one day folding gently into the next. The city kept moving, busy and loud, but he moved through it with a steadiness that surprised even him. The moment with the piano no longer felt like something behind him. It felt like something walking beside him, not pushing, not pulling, just present. He began to notice how often people avoided looking at one another. Eyes dropped quickly. Steps hurried. Everyone seemed to be carrying something heavy, even when their hands were empty. He recognized that feeling. For a long time, it had lived inside him too. Now, when he caught someone's gaze, he did not look away right away. Sometimes there was a brief connection. Sometimes a nod. Sometimes nothing at all. But even that felt different. He no longer felt like he was moving through the world unseen. Music stayed with him in small ways. He tapped rhythms on railings while waiting. He listened closely to sounds others ignored, the pattern of footsteps, the rise and fall of voices, the distant hum of traffic that almost sounded like a low note held too long. These sounds became part of his inner world. One evening, as he rested near a familiar place, a young person approached him slowly. There was hesitation in their steps, the kind that comes with wanting to ask something but not knowing how. They stopped a short distance away and spoke softly, asking if he was the one who had played the piano that night. He was surprised. He nodded once, unsure what else to do. The person smiled, relief clear on their face. They said they had been there that evening. They explained that they had been struggling with something of their own, feeling stuck and unsure. Hearing that music, they said, had helped them breathe again. Even if only for a moment. He listened carefully, not interrupting. When they finished, he thanked them for telling him. That was all. No advice. No lessons. Just gratitude after they left. He sat quietly for a long time. He had not realized how far that moment had traveled, how it had reached beyond the walls of that room. The thought humbled him. He understood then that music had never been just for him. It had always been a bridge, even when he did not know where it led. Opportunities came slowly, never announced. A small place that welcomed open evenings. A corner where someone kept an instrument and did not mind sharing. Nothing official. Nothing promised. Just chances that appeared when he stayed open. He learned when to accept and when to decline. Not every moment needed music. Sometimes presence was enough. Sometimes silence was the better gift. There were still difficult days. Nights when the city felt too big and he felt too small. But even then, he carried a quiet confidence. He had felt what it was like to be fully heard, even briefly. That feeling could not be taken away. People continued to share the story in different ways. Some focused on the hunger. Some focused on the music. Some spoke about kindness. None of them were wrong. The story held all of it. He did not correct anyone. Stories grow on their own. They find the shape they need. One afternoon, passing a familiar street, he heard piano music drifting through an open window. It was unsteady, simple, but sincere. He stopped and listened. A smile spread across his face. Someone else was learning. Someone else was finding their voice. He moved on. Heart lighter than before. He realized that what mattered most was not the piano or the food or even the reaction of the crowd. What mattered was the moment of choice. The choice to stay instead of leaving, to answer instead of shrinking, to offer something real when very little was expected. That choice had changed the path of his days. Even if the change was quiet, as night fell, the city lights flickered on one by one. He walked through them calmly, blending into the movement around him. To anyone watching, he was just another person heading somewhere unknown. But inside, there was clarity. Life did not need a stage to be meaningful. It only needed honesty and the courage to share what was already there. He continued forward, carrying music not as a performance, but as a way of being, and somewhere without him knowing, someone else would remember that night and choose kindness or courage or patience. Because of it, the story did not end. It simply became part of the world, woven into ordinary days, reminding those who listened closely that even the simplest moments can open doors that stay open long after the sound fades. Seasons shifted without asking permission. Warm days gave way to cooler ones, and the city changed its colors, slowly, almost politely. He noticed these changes more now. Time no longer felt like something chasing him. It felt like something he was walking alongside. He kept his routine simple. Wake, move, listen. Some days brought small work. Some days brought nothing at all. Yet even the empty days held shape. He filled them with attention instead of worry, with awareness instead of fear. Music stayed present, but it did not demand to be played every day. Sometimes it lived only in his thoughts, humming softly while he waited for a bus or crossed the street. Other times, it arrived suddenly, asking to be let out. When that happened, he looked for a place that felt open enough to receive it. There was a small space not far from where he often walked. It was quiet most mornings, busy only in the afternoons. One day, a piano appeared there, placed carefully near the wall. A small sign invited anyone to sit and play, no skill required. He stood at a distance at first, watching others approach it. Some pressed keys and laughed at the noise they made. Others touched it gently, unsure. A few sat and played with confidence. Every sound was different. Every sound belonged. He waited. When he finally sat down, no one paid special attention. That felt right. He placed his hands on the keys and let them rest there for a moment. The piano felt different again, lighter somehow, as if it carried less history and more possibility. He played something simple, a melody shaped by walking, by waiting, by listening to the world instead of escaping it. It did not rise high or fall low. It moved forward steadily, like breath. People passed by. Some slowed. Some stopped. A few stayed until the end. He did not watch their faces. He trusted the music to meet them where they were. When he finished, he stood and left quietly, the same way he had arrived. No one clapped. No one asked questions. And yet, the moment mattered just as much. Later that day, he felt tired in a good way. Not drained, but used. Like something inside him had found its purpose again. He began to understand that meaning did not come from being remembered. It came from being present. From showing up honestly, when the moment allowed, he crossed paths again with the person who had spoken to him days earlier. The one who said the music had helped them breathe. This time, they did not speak. They simply exchanged a smile and kept moving. That was enough. The city kept absorbing these small exchanges, holding them quietly between its walls. It did not announce them. It did not record them. But they existed. He thought about how easily moments could be missed. How often people passed one another without knowing what they carried. He knew now that every person held a story that could open a door, if given space. Some evenings he returned to the street where it had all begun. He did not go inside. He listened from outside, letting the sounds drift through the doorway. Laughter, cups, music from a speaker. Life continuing. He felt no pull to step back into that moment. It had already given him what he needed. Instead, he focused on what came next, not as a plan, but as a direction, toward honesty, toward connection, toward small offerings made without expectation. One night, as rain began to fall lightly, he found shelter under an overhang and listened to the rhythm it made on metal and concrete. He tapped his fingers softly, matching the pattern. Music, he realized, was not limited to instruments. It lived in everything that repeated with feeling. He stayed there until the rain slowed, then continued on, steps careful, steady. He understood now that legends were not always created in bright light. Some were formed quietly, through consistency, through choices made again and again without applause. The piano moment had not changed who he was. It had revealed who he had always been. As he walked deeper into the night, the city lights blurred slightly in the distance. He felt no rush to arrive anywhere. Wherever he was already present. Somewhere ahead, another piano waited. Or maybe just another person. Or maybe just another quiet choice. Whatever it was, he would meet it the same way he had met the first moment. Open, honest, willing. And in that willingness, the story continued not as something told, but as something lived. One simple moment at a time. The city woke slowly that morning, stretching itself awake with soft light and distant noise. He was already moving, following a familiar path that had become part of his days. Nothing felt urgent. Nothing felt delayed. He walked with the calm of someone who had learned to listen to time instead of racing it. He noticed how people carried their mornings differently. Some moved fast, eyes fixed ahead. Others dragged their feet, heavy with thought. He wondered what sounds lived inside them, what songs they might be carrying without knowing it. Music had become a quiet guide. Not something that demanded attention, but something that shaped how he paid attention. He listened more carefully now, not just to sound, but to silence. Silence, he had learned, often said the most. He stopped at a small place he had never entered before. The door was open, and a soft hum of activity drifted out. Inside, a piano sat near the wall. It was not placed to be admired. It was placed to be used. He hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. No one asked him why he was there. No one questioned his presence. That alone felt like a kind of welcome. He nodded once to the people inside and moved toward the piano. He sat down and rested his hands on the keys. The feeling was familiar now, no longer distant or uncertain. He began to play without planning, letting the moment lead instead of memory. The sound filled the space gently. Conversation softened. Movement slowed. It was the same reaction he had seen before, yet it never felt ordinary. Each time it felt like a small miracle. He played for a while, then stopped. He did not wait for response. He did not need it. As he stood to leave, someone nearby thanked him quietly. Another person smiled. That was enough. Outside, the day had grown brighter. He walked on, carrying the warmth of the moment with him. He knew now that these small exchanges were shaping his days. It's more than any single event ever could. He thought about how the story of that first night had spread. Not widely, not loudly. It lived in corners of conversation, in quiet reflections, in choices made with a little more care. He understood now that stories did not need endings. They needed continuation. Later he found himself sitting alone, watching people pass. He imagined lines connecting them, invisible threads formed by shared moments, brief glances, unspoken understanding. Music, he realized, was just one way those lines formed. A memory surfaced of the hunger that had first brought him inside that room. It felt distant now, not because his life had become easy, but because it no longer defined him. Need had been replaced by awareness. He smiled at the thought as evening approached. The sky shifted colors slowly, as if taking its time. He stood and continued walking, letting the city guide him. He did not wonder where he would end up. Wherever he arrived would be enough. He felt no need to hold on to the past moment tightly. It had already done its work. It had opened a door and he had walked through. Music continued to find him in unexpected places. In footsteps. In laughter. In rain tapping lightly on glass. He welcomed it all. He knew now that even if he never touched a piano again, the music would remain. It lived in how he moved, how he listened, how he noticed the world. But he also knew he would touch one again. As night settled in, lights flickered on around him. He paused, taking in the view. The city looked different at night, softer. It's more honest. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Somewhere, someone was asking a small question. Somewhere else, someone was waiting for an answer. He continued forward, ready to meet whatever moment came next, not with fear or expectation, but with openness, the legend, if it could be called that. It was never about the piano. It was about listening, and that was something he would keep doing, one quiet step at a time.